right into this place, sir.
The document had been missing for 18 months. Nobody outside a handful of senior palace officials even knew it existed, which made its disappearance easier to hide but no less catastrophic. Queen Elizabeth had written a private will in the final weeks of her life, separate from her official estate documents, containing instructions about family matters that she wanted handled in specific ways. When archivists finally discovered evidence that the will had been deliberately destroyed, an investigation was launched that would lead to the most shocking discovery in modern royal history. Security footage, recovered emails, and witness testimony all pointed to the same two people. Let's get started. The Royal Archives housed in Windsor Castle contained hundreds of thousands of documents spanning centuries of monarchy, each carefully catalogued and preserved according to protocols established long before anyone currently working there was born. Senior archivists took their responsibilities seriously, understanding that they were custodians of history that could never be replaced if lost or damaged. It was during a routine inventory check, the kind conducted annually to ensure everything remained accounted for, that a discrepancy was first noticed. A document listed in the Queen's final year registry was missing from its designated location. The initial assumption was simple misfiling, a common enough occurrence in a collection so vast. But when archivists searched surrounding files and expanded their hunt to related collections, the document remained unfound. The registry entry provided minimal details, listing it only as a personal memorandum dated 3 weeks before Queen Elizabeth's death and marked with her highest privacy classification. Such classification meant very few people would have had authorized access, which made its disappearance more concerning. The head archivist reported the missing document to her supervisor, who escalated it through proper channels until it reached the King's private secretary. What began as an administrative curiosity was about to become a constitutional crisis. The private secretary understood immediately that this was not a matter of simple misfiling. Documents with that level of classification did not just vanish. They were either deliberately removed or had never been properly filed in the first place, and both possibilities raised serious questions. He requested access to security logs, showing who had entered the archives during the relevant time period. The logs revealed something unexpected. Queen Camilla had visited the archives twice in the months following Queen Elizabeth's death, accompanied on one occasion by her daughter Laura Lopes. Both visits had been logged as official, with appropriate authorization codes. However, neither woman had any apparent reason to be accessing historical documents during a period when the family was still processing grief and transition. The private secretary brought this information to King Charles during a routine briefing, presenting it carefully as a matter requiring clarification rather than as an accusation. Charles was confused by the news. He did not know that Camilla had visited the archives and could not imagine why she would have done so without mentioning it. When asked directly, Camilla seemed equally puzzled, claiming she had no memory of such visits and suggesting the logs might be mistaken. Charles requested a full investigation, wanting to understand what had happened without jumping to conclusions that might be unfair. A small team of security professionals and legal advisors was assembled to reconstruct events and determine what had become of the missing document. They began by interviewing archive staff who had been working during the period in question. The investigators then examined security camera footage from the archives, something that had not been done initially because there had been no reason to suspect anything criminal had occurred. The footage was grainy and limited, as the cameras in the archives were primarily positioned to monitor entrances rather than to track individuals once inside. But enough footage existed to confirm that Camilla and Laura had indeed been present, had spent significant time in the section where the missing document should have been stored, and had left the building carrying materials they had not brought in. Charles was shown the footage during a meeting with the investigative team. He watched in silence as his wife and her daughter moved through the archives, clearly searching for something specific. His face betrayed no emotion, but those present described his stillness as almost frightening, the kind of controlled reaction that comes from experiencing shock too profound for immediate expression. When the footage ended, Charles asked a single question: what was in the document that is missing? The investigators admitted they did not know for certain, as the registry entry provided minimal detail, but they had found references in other files suggesting it concerned the Queen's private wishes regarding family matters, potentially including instructions about relationships and future arrangements within the family structure. This information triggered something in Charles's memory. In the final weeks of his mother's life, during one of their last private conversations, she had mentioned wanting to put certain things in writing to ensure her wishes were known and could not be disputed after her death. Charles had assumed she was referring to her official will, which had been properly executed and filed. But now he wondered if she had created something separate, something more personal that addressed matters the official will could not or should not cover. If such a document existed and had been destroyed, the implications would have been staggering. King Charles authorized the investigation to continue with an expanded scope and resources. He wanted to know exactly what had been destroyed and why. He tried to understand whether Camilla had acted alone or if others had been involved. And most importantly, he wanted to know whether his wife had betrayed not just the institution, but also his mother's memory and his own trust. The investigation would take weeks to complete, weeks during which Charles had to maintain a normal appearance while preparing internally for the possibility that his marriage was built on foundations far more unstable than he had ever imagined. The truth, when it finally emerged, would be worse than anything he had allowed himself to fear. The investigative team worked methodically, interviewing everyone who might have had knowledge of Queen Elizabeth's final months and her intentions regarding personal documentation. They spoke with her private secretaries, her doctors, her ladies-in-waiting, and anyone who had been close enough to have heard her discuss creating such a document. This secretary confirmed that Queen Elizabeth had indeed created a private will in her final weeks, had worked on it personally with legal assistance from a trusted solicitor who had served the family for decades. The will had been created specifically to address matters that the official estate documents could not touch, personal wishes about family dynamics and future arrangements. The secretary had been present when the document was finalized and had witnessed the Queen sign it, her trembling hands betraying her determination despite her weakening physical state. The document had then been sealed and placed in the archives under the highest security classification, to be opened only upon the Queen's death, and read first by the new monarch before being shared with others as appropriate. What made this information so explosive was the secretary's revelation of the will's contents. While respecting confidentiality in most areas, the secretary felt compelled to share one crucial detail given the circumstances. The Queen's private will contained explicit instructions regarding Camilla's role in the family going forward. Queen Elizabeth had serious reservations about Camilla becoming Queen Consort, reservations she had suppressed publicly for the sake of family unity, but had wanted recorded privately. The will stipulated that while Charles could marry Camilla, there were conditions attached to her holding the title of Queen. Specifically, Elizabeth had wanted assurances that Camilla would not interfere in matters of succession, would maintain distance from certain state functions, and would understand her position was contingent on behavior that honored the institution rather than personal ambition. This revelation hit Charles like a physical blow when the investigators briefed him. His mother had supported his marriage publicly, but had harbored private doubts significant enough to put restrictions in writing. The fact that this document had been destroyed meant those restrictions no longer existed, that Camilla's position was unrestricted in ways Elizabeth had specifically wanted to prevent. If Camilla had known the will's contents and destroyed it to eliminate those restrictions, it would have represented a betrayal of breathtaking audacity. It meant she valued her position and freedom from limitations more than she respected the wishes of a dying woman who had been queen for 70 years. The investigation intensified with this new information. Investigators needed to prove not just that the document had been destroyed, but that Camilla and Laura had known what it contained and had deliberately targeted it for destruction. This required finding evidence of how they had learned about the will's existence and contents. The breakthrough came from digital forensics. Investigators examining Camilla's personal computer, done with proper legal authorization once criminal intent became suspected, found deleted emails that had been imperfectly erased. The emails, dated shortly after Queen Elizabeth's death, showed correspondence between Camilla and Laura discussing a document that concerned both of them, using vague language but clearly referring to something in the archives. One email from Laura to Camilla was particularly damning. It referenced having located the document in question and asking whether they should proceed with the plan they had discussed. Camilla's response email, recovered through forensic analysis, was brief but precise. Yes, take care of it completely. No trace. The emails did not explicitly name the will, likely because both women understood the risk of creating clear evidence. But the timing, the context, and the subsequent disappearance of the document made a circumstantial case that was compelling if not conclusive. The investigators needed more to be certain of Camilla's involvement and intent. They found it in the archives themselves. Advanced forensic analysis of the storage area where the will should have been located revealed traces of ash that were absent during routine cleanings prior to Camilla and Laura's visit. Chemical analysis confirmed the ash came from high-quality paper consistent with official royal documents. It appeared the will had not just been removed but burned, likely in one of the archive's old fireplaces, which were rarely used but remained functional. Destroying a document by burning was more thorough than simply removing it, suggesting premeditation and an understanding of the need for complete elimination. A statement from a maintenance worker provided the final piece. This worker recalled being asked by a well-dressed woman matching Laura's description to light a fire in one of the archive fireplaces on a particular date, claiming she felt cold and wanted warmth while working. The worker had complied without suspicion, as the request seemed innocuous. But the timing matched perfectly with one of Laura's visits, and the location was the same area where the will should have been stored. The woman had stayed alone with the fire for approximately half an hour, more than enough time to burn a document completely and ensure no recoverable fragments remained. When all the evidence was compiled and presented to Charles, the case against Camilla and Laura was substantial, though not quite ironclad. There was physical evidence of their presence, digital evidence of planning, forensic evidence of document destruction, and witness testimony placing them at the scene. What remained unclear was whether Camilla had initiated the plan or had been brought into it by Laura. The distinction mattered legally and personally. Charles needed to understand his wife's role and motivations before deciding how to confront her. The investigators advised confrontation as the best path forward, believing that, faced with overwhelming evidence, Camilla might confess and provide missing details about her decision-making process. Charles agonized over how to handle the confrontation. This was not just about institutional wrongdoing or criminal behavior. This was about his wife potentially destroying his mother's final wishes, lying about it for 18 months and fundamentally betraying everything their marriage was supposed to represent. He could barely reconcile the woman he thought he knew with someone capable of such calculated deception. Part of him hoped there was an explanation he had not considered, some context that would make this less damning than it appeared. But as he repeatedly reviewed the evidence, that hope faded. Camilla had done this, had conspired with her daughter to eliminate restrictions Elizabeth had wanted imposed, and had lied about it when questioned. The truth was inescapable, and Charles had to decide what that truth meant for their future. Charles arranged for a private meeting with Camilla in his study at Clarence House, a location where they could speak without interruption. He told her only that they needed to discuss an urgent matter, giving no hint of the storm about to break. Camilla arrived expecting perhaps a discussion of scheduling or family matters, nothing that would prepare her for what Charles was about to reveal. He began by asking her directly whether she had anything to tell him about visits to the royal archives in the months following his mother's death. Camilla's face remained composed as she repeated her earlier claim of not remembering such visits and suggested the logs must be mistaken. Charles then produced the security footage on a laptop, turning it toward her and pressing play. Camilla watched herself on screen moving through the archives, and her expression shifted from confusion to recognition to something that looked like fear. She opened her mouth to speak, but Charles held up a hand. "Please do not insult me with more lies. I have seen the footage. I have read the emails between you and Laura. I know about the fireplace and the ash. I know you destroyed my mother's private will. What I want to understand is why." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with accusation and pain. Camilla's composure crumbled completely, tears beginning to flow as the reality of being caught settled over her. Her initial response was denial. She claimed she did not know what he was talking about, and that there must be some misunderstanding. But Charles was relentless, methodically presenting each piece of evidence, showing her the deleted emails, explaining the forensic findings, making it clear that denial was pointless. Faced with undeniable proof, Camilla's defense shifted to justification. She admitted she had learned about the will's existence through a casual comment from a palace staff member who had not realized the information was sensitive. When she investigated further and discovered what restrictions Elizabeth had wanted to impose on her role as queen consort, she was hurt and angry. Those restrictions felt like being called inadequate, like being told she would never be truly accepted despite decades of service and dedication. Laura had been the one to suggest destroying the document, arguing that Elizabeth's private wishes were precisely that, private, and that they had no legal force over Charles's decisions as king. If the will disappeared, its restrictions vanished with it, and Camilla could serve as queen consort without arbitrary limitations imposed by someone who had never fully accepted her. Camilla claimed she had initially resisted the idea, but had eventually convinced herself that eliminating the will was not really wrong, that it just removed outdated obstacles to her fully supporting Charles in his new role. She had told herself it was for the good of the monarchy, that Elizabeth's reservations had been unfair and should not constrain the future. Charles listened to this explanation with growing disbelief and disgust. "So you decided that your hurt feelings and your daughter's ambitions justified destroying my mother's last wishes. You decided that you knew better than a woman who served as queen for 70 years what was good for the monarchy. You decided that your comfort mattered more than respecting the woman whose death made it possible for me to become king and for you to become queen. Do you have any idea how selfish and disrespectful that is?" Camilla tried to defend herself, saying she had been thinking of Charles's reign and did not want it constrained by the past. But Charles cut her off sharply. "Do not dare claim you did this for me. You did this for yourself and for Laura, and you lied about it, even after multiple opportunities to come clean." The argument escalated quickly from there, decades of unspoken tensions surfacing alongside the immediate betrayal. Charles brought up how Camilla had always seemed to resent not being fully embraced by all parts of the family, how she had pushed for recognition and status that others felt she had not earned. Camilla countered with grievances about being constantly compared to Diana, about never being good enough no matter what she did, and about sacrificing her own children's privacy and comfort for the sake of Charles's position. The conversation devolved into mutual recriminations that accomplished nothing except making both parties angrier and more entrenched. Eventually, Charles said something that made the room go completely silent. "I cannot stay married to someone who would do this." Camilla stared at him, the words not quite processing at first. When their meaning sank in, she began to panic. "Charles, you cannot be serious. We have been together for decades. One mistake cannot end everything we have built." But Charles shook his head firmly. This was not one mistake. This was a calculated betrayal carried out over time and then concealed through lies. "You destroyed something irreplaceable and violated my mother's memory." Camilla begged him to reconsider, to think about what divorce would mean for the monarchy, for their public image, for the chaos it would create. Charles acknowledged these concerns but said they paled in comparison to the fundamental breach of trust that had occurred. How could he rule as king with a queen consort he could not trust? How could he expect others to honor their commitments to the institution when his own wife had shown such disrespect for its most basic principles? The marriage was over, not because he wanted it to be, but because Camilla's actions had made it impossible to continue. He asked her to leave the room and said his solicitors would be in contact about arrangements. Camilla left in tears, still hoping perhaps that Charles would calm down and reconsider. But people who knew him well understood that when Charles made decisions based on principle rather than emotion, he rarely reversed them. This was not an angry impulse that would fade with time. This was a fundamental reassessment of who Camilla was and whether their relationship could survive such betrayal. The answer he had reached was no, and all that remained was implementing that decision in a way that managed the inevitable public and institutional fallout. Word of the impending divorce leaked within 48 hours despite everyone's best efforts to maintain confidentiality. Palace staff who noticed the king and queen no longer appearing together, who overheard heated conversations, who saw legal documents being prepared, put pieces together, and whispered to colleagues. Those whispers reached journalists who had sources throughout royal households, and suddenly, the media was running stories about a crisis in the marriage. Initial reports were vague and speculative, but they captured the essential truth that something catastrophic had happened between Charles and Camilla. The palace communications team scrambled to manage the narrative before it spiraled completely out of control. They faced an impossible challenge: the truth that Camilla had destroyed Queen Elizabeth's private will was too damaging to reveal publicly. It would devastate Camilla's reputation beyond any possibility of recovery and raise questions about the legitimacy of decisions made in the 18 months since the will's destruction. But without revealing the truth, how could they explain why Charles was ending a marriage that had been decades in the making? Any explanation that avoided the real cause would invite rampant speculation and conspiracy theories that might be even more damaging than the truth. After extensive consultations with Charles, his senior advisors, and legal experts, a decision was made to release a truthful but vague statement. The statement acknowledged that the king and queen consort had agreed to separate due to irreconcilable differences regarding matters of trust and conduct. It emphasized that the decision was mutual and final, and it requested privacy as both parties navigated this transition. The statement generated more questions than it answered, which was inevitable, but it avoided outright lies while protecting the most explosive details. Media coverage exploded anyway, with endless speculation about what trust and conduct issues could have caused such a dramatic rupture. Camilla initially resisted the divorce, hoping time would change Charles's mind. Her lawyers advised her that fighting the divorce would likely result in the whole truth becoming public through court proceedings, which would destroy her completely. If she accepted the divorce quietly and with dignity, there was a chance her reputation could survive relatively intact. People would assume some generic marital conflict had occurred rather than learning about her destruction of the Queen's will. Faced with this choice, Camilla reluctantly agreed to expedite a divorce to minimize public legal proceedings. The question of what to tell the public about her future role proved complex. Technically, divorce would end Camilla's position as queen consort, but the palace wanted to avoid the spectacle of stripping her of the title through a dramatic announcement. Instead, it was quietly indicated that following the divorce, Camilla would revert to using the title Duchess of Cornwall, her previous designation. She would retain certain privileges befitting her status as the king's former wife and the mother-in-law of future monarchs through her connection to William's family. But she would no longer participate in state functions or represent the monarchy in any official capacity. Effectively, she was being eased into obscurity as gently as circumstances allowed. Public reaction to the divorce news was sharply divided. Many people expressed shock and sympathy, having believed Charles and Camilla's marriage was stable and loving. Others, particularly those who had never accepted Camilla as appropriate for Charles, expressed satisfaction that the relationship had finally ended. Social media erupted with theories about what had really happened, ranging from plausible suggestions about fundamental incompatibility to wild conspiracy theories involving affairs or financial scandals. Very few people guessed anywhere close to the truth about the destroyed will, which remained the royal family's most closely guarded secret. William and his wife found themselves in an awkward position. William had never been close to Camilla, had tolerated her for his father's sake rather than developing genuine warmth toward her. Learning what she had done to his grandmother's will confirmed his long-held suspicions that Camilla prioritized her own interests over the institution's needs. But publicly, he had to maintain neutrality, supporting his father's decision without appearing to celebrate Camilla's downfall. Catherine, who had always been diplomatic in her dealings with Camilla, expressed private relief that a source of family tension had been removed, even as she worried about the immediate chaos the divorce would create. Prince Harry, contacted in California and informed of the situation, had a complicated reaction. He had his own complex history with Camilla and had never fully forgiven her role in his parents' marriage breakdown. But he also recognized that his father was experiencing genuine pain and betrayal. Harry reached out to Charles directly, one of their first substantive conversations in years, offering support and expressing understanding of how difficult this must be. The conversation was brief and somewhat awkward, given their strained relationship, but it marked a slight thaw in the coldness. Shared experience of betrayal by a spouse created unexpected common ground. The months following the announcement were chaotic for everyone involved. Camilla moved out of shared residences and into her private property, largely disappearing from public view. Her daughter Laura, whose role in destroying the will had not been publicly revealed, also withdrew from public life, aware that association with her mother's scandal made her toxic in royal circles. The king threw himself into more royal duties with renewed intensity, using work as a distraction from personal pain. Those close to him described a man who felt he had aged a decade in a matter of months. The cumulative weight of losing his mother and then his wife proving almost too much to bear. 6 months after everything was finalized, King Charles gave his first extended interview since the split. He chose a respected journalist known for serious reporting rather than sensationalism, wanting to discuss his decision in thoughtful terms rather than tabloid soundbites. The interview took place at Highgrove, Charles's beloved country estate, in a setting that felt personal rather than institutional. He appeared tired but resolved, someone who had made peace with a painful decision and was ready to explain his reasoning within the bounds of what could be publicly shared. The journalist asked directly what had led to the divorce after so many years together. Charles's answer was careful but revealing. He spoke about trust being fundamental to any relationship, but especially to a marriage that exists in service of an institution. When trust is violated in ways that cannot be repaired, continuing the marriage becomes impossible regardless of history or affection. He acknowledged that ending the marriage had been the hardest decision of his life, but insisted it had been necessary. Some betrayals cannot be forgiven, not because of vindictiveness, but because they reveal fundamental incompatibility of values and priorities. Asked whether he regretted marrying Camilla, Charles paused for a long time before answering. He said he cherished many memories from their years together and did not wish to diminish what had been good about their relationship. But with hindsight, he could see warning signs he had ignored or minimized, moments when their different approaches to duty and institution had created friction that should have been more carefully examined. He had wanted to believe love could overcome those differences. Events had proven otherwise. His answer was diplomatic, but carried an undercurrent of sadness and perhaps regret about the time and energy invested in a relationship that had ultimately failed so dramatically. The interviewer asked about the future, whether Charles could imagine marrying again. Charles smiled ruefully and said that at his age and in his position, another marriage seemed both unlikely and unwise. He had learned painful lessons about the complexity of blending personal desire with institutional responsibility. His focus now was entirely on his role as king, on serving the nation and the Commonwealth to the best of his ability, and on supporting the next generation as they prepared to eventually assume the burdens he currently carried. Romance and companionship were luxuries he no longer felt entitled to pursue, given the complications they had created in his life. Behind the scenes, Charles was working to ensure the disaster of the destroyed will could never be repeated. He ordered comprehensive reviews of archive security, implementing new protocols requiring multiple authorizations to access sensitive documents, and installed more extensive camera coverage. He also worked with legal advisors to draft his own private will, drawing on his mother's experience. His will was not just signed and sealed, but was placed in multiple secure copies at different locations, making it virtually impossible for anyone to destroy all versions. The provisions he included addressed many of the same concerns his mother had worried about, ensuring his wishes about family matters would be known and honored regardless of what happened after his death. The question of what to do about Laura Lopes remained unresolved because she had been instrumental in destroying the will, possibly even the instigator, but revealing her role publicly. Her role served no purpose beyond satisfying desires for complete transparency. Charles decided that Laura's exile from royal circles and the destruction of her mother's position were punishment enough. Pursuing criminal charges would require revealing what had been destroyed, something Charles remained unwilling to do for institutional reasons. So Laura lived with her guilt and diminished circumstances privately, a form of justice that was incomplete, but perhaps sufficient under the complex circumstances. William gradually stepped into a more prominent role during this period, understanding that his father needed support and that the institution needed visible stability. He and Catherine increased their public appearances and took on additional responsibilities, providing continuity and positive news to offset the divorce's negative impact. William also had frank conversations with his father about succession planning and the importance of ensuring clear, documented wishes that could not be disputed or destroyed. Father and son grew closer through this crisis, finding common ground in shared commitment to protecting the institution Queen Elizabeth had devoted her life to strengthening. Charles privately acknowledged the irony. He had spent decades defending his relationship with Camilla against critics who said she was inappropriate for a future king. He had insisted on marrying her despite concerns from family members and institutional advisors, and now he had divorced her for betraying the institution he had asked everyone to trust her to serve. The arc of that story felt almost Shakespearean in its tragedy and irony, but Charles had learned something crucial through the pain. Personal happiness could not come at the cost of institutional integrity. When forced to choose between his wife and his mother's legacy, between his comfort and his duty, he had chosen duty. It was the choice the late Queen would have made, and in making it, Charles finally felt he had earned the right to wear the crown she had passed to him. Some would argue he should have found a way to forgive, to maintain the marriage while implementing safeguards to prevent future misconduct. Others would defend his choice as principled and correct, arguing that some betrayals are too fundamental to overlook. Charles himself spent little time revisiting the decision once made. He had acted in accordance with his values and his understanding of what the monarchy required. Whether history judged him kindly or harshly mattered less than knowing he had done what he believed was right. That certainty, hard-won and painfully achieved, was enough. The whole truth remains hidden behind palace walls even now, known only to those who lived through it. If this revelation about royal betrayal and the king's principled response shocked you as profoundly as it did us, you absolutely must hit that like button and subscribe immediately. We uncover the stories that others cannot or will not tell, the secrets that explain the headlines, the truth that hides in plain sight. Do not miss a single story. Subscribe now, turn on notifications, and join us as we continue exposing what really happens when duty collides with personal desire. See you in the next video.